So I think the thing that I really like the most from the horseshoe crab fossil record is the story of survival. Honestly, 5 mass extinctions. They've seen the world very literally be hammered by meteorite. They've seen the world be very literally turned upside down by super volcanoes. They've seen the world basically freeze over, and they survived all of this. I think that's a really beautiful summary of just general survivorship over that deep time context.
More than 450 million years ago, on an Earth quite different than the one we know today, a new creature arose from the depths. Predating even the earliest records of sharks, long before Saturn formed its rings, and before trees were even a thought in evolution's mind, a survivor arose.
We often call horseshoe crabs living fossils, and we call them that because they haven't changed very much externally. Those Jurassic horseshoe crabs that we find in southern Europe look almost identical to the modern horseshoe crabs.
Since their arrival on this Earth, they've witnessed incredible things. Generation after generation, they've seen mountains drown, whole continents move, and countless other creatures arise and perish as deep time pressed on in its unending and relentless march.
You have a group of animals that survived for 450-odd million years, so they must have some tricks up their sleeve for how they've managed to survive in eras of different temperature, of changes in oxygen content of the water, and changes in salinity and so forth. So what is it about the present day animal in terms of its physiology and biology that can help explain why it's been such a survivor?
Today, we're telling the story of a group of animals who, with chitinous armor and a lot of grit, have survived not 1, not 2, but 5 mass extinctions. An animal that has saved countless human lives, inspired art and music, and now joins us in facing the existential threat of a potential 6th extinction that threatens the many lineages of life that started in those ancient seas. How have these creatures done it? Maybe it's survival of the fittest, but maybe it's survival of the weirdest.
I mean, they're just weird, right? They're weird little dudes. They're cute, weird little dudes. And if that doesn't get you excited, then, I don't know what to say.
In the battle for survival, may the weird ones win. Let's descend. Hey there! You're listening to Bio-Diversity, the podcast about pelagic paradigms and coral curiosities, each episode bringing you the best in flippin' fun fish facts straight to your ear holes. It's like we're the delivery drivers of peer-reviewed aquatic science, the Grubhub of fish food for your mind, the DoorDash of dope decapods. If you're new, here on the show, we examine the weird, wacky, and wonderful diversity of life that lives under the sparkling waters of our blue home. Using science as our guide, we dive deep into both the common and the rare, the exotic and the ugly. So tune in for the tuna, and hang around for the ancient aliens. Let's descend. Today on the show, we're descending both into the briny waves of our coasts and backwards through deep time to examine an animal as alien as it is endearing. Ladies, gentlemen, and all those in between, today we are talking about the enigmatic and I dare say charismatic horseshoe crab. The story of these animals is so fascinating, so unique, that we have not 1, not 2, but 3 guests on today's show to share in the hype of these incredible animals.
My name is Mark Botton. I am a professor emeritus of biology at Fordham University in New York City.
I'm Jane Brockmann, and I am a emeritus professor from the Department of Biology at the University of Florida.
Yeah, hi. So my name is Russell Bicknell, and I am currently based in Adelaide, Australia, and I am what's called an Australian Research Council DECRA Fellow. So I am a governmentally funded research person based down under.
As serendipity would have it, all three of our guests today have surnames that start with B and have focused some part of their careers around the study of these ancient-looking creatures. Talking with these three experts, it becomes abundantly clear that the world of the horseshoe crab is exciting and mysterious as never before. So with multiple experts comes multiple episodes. In order to do these creatures the justice they truly deserve, this is just the first of 3 biodiversity episodes meant to get you intrigued and hyped about these ancient wonders of the ocean world. Dr. Botton, the first voice you heard, has spent a lot of time thinking about just how it is these animals have survived, evolutionarily speaking, for so long.
Well, I think if there's one theme, it's trying to understand something about how the animal works in context to its long evolutionary history. So we've done a series of studies in the lab over the years looking at environmental tolerances of the eggs and the embryos in particular to different kinds of environmental challenges. Because typically the eggs and embryos are the life history stage that's most susceptible to environmental perturbations. So if you can survive through those stages, chances are as they get older, they'll be even more tolerant. So that's probably the overall theme of what my research has been over the 45 years or so that I've done it.
The second voice you heard belongs to Dr. Brockmann, who is every bit as much an expert. With her work in Florida, she's focused a lot more on the reproductive behavior of these animals, which, as we'll discover, is a wild subject, every bit worth a whole career's worth of study.
I have studied mostly reproductive behavior. My field is animal behavior. And prior to studying horseshoe crabs, I studied insects. And actually, I studied little fish for my master's degree. I was teaching animal behavior, undergraduate animal behavior. And I wanted to give my students an opportunity to do some field work. And we have a field station on an island 3 miles from shore on the west coast of Florida. So I decided to start taking my students out there for weekend field trips. And I discovered that there were horseshoe crabs coming to the beach in the springtime. And so I just organized my course so that my students could go out and do some field work. The field station had bunk beds and a kitchen and so forth. And so we went out and stayed for the weekend, and it was actually wonderful. You get undergraduates out in the field, and they become biologists over the weekend.
And the last, but most certainly not least, voice belongs to a man with his hands deep in the dirt. Dr. Bicknell is a paleoscientist with an eye for the secrets of the fossils and an aptitude for asking what the past can teach us about the modern day and our future.
So a lot of my work sort of bridges the gap between zoology, the living, and paleontology, the study of that which once was living. And a lot of my research recently has been trying to understand how animals like crabs and scorpions, how they use their pincers and how these kinds of structures have evolved and been converged upon. And this really builds off a lot of my work during my PhD and my previous positions that has used arthropods, animals with exoskeletons, that are alive today as a comparison for understanding what we see in the fossil record, which is where my interest in horseshoe crabs kind of overlaps there. And from there, I got really interested in understanding the general evolutionary history of horseshoe crabs. I kind of realized that there weren't that many people who were thinking about these kinds of questions. And that really led me down a myriad of rabbit holes, understanding the fossil record of these groups, and has kind of resulted in me having a very, very fun career understanding these organisms from a paleontological and a zoological context.
With the help of these three experts, in today's episode, we'll be peeling back the spiky shell of these animals, metaphorically speaking, of course, and talking about the crab's various physiological and anatomical superpowers, as well as its ecological importance. In episode 2, we'll focus on the story of these animals, both in what the fossil record across deep time can teach us, and also exploring the mysteries and intricacies of their life history in the modern day. And finally, to round out the month of the ancient arthropod, episode 3 will focus most on the relationship between these animals and us humans, with a lot of discussion that I think my friends in the conservation space will find both insightful and intriguing. But first things first, as always, we begin with the most basic of questions. What in the heck even is a horseshoe crab? If you live on the US East Coast, the Gulf Coast, or even around the Yucatan Peninsula, chances are you've encountered one of these strange, spiky, alien-looking dudes, part of the species Limulus polyphemus, known as the American horseshoe crab. This species is one of just 4 known species alive today, and is the one pictured in the cover photo of the very episode when you clicked on it. 1,000 words that picture may be worth, but even it only tells half the story.
There's no real way to kind of describe what these animals look like in, I suppose, a one-to-one comparison with a bunch of other organisms, because horseshoe crabs are just really unique unto themselves. If you've seen an extinct animal called a trilobite, they're kind of like trilobites, but with a bit more spikes on them. It's really like if you took a spider and then you gave a spider a suit of armor and then you gave that suit of armor a tail on the end of it. That's how I would describe them.
Well, to me, they look like a little helmet, like a helmet that you might wear, a soldier might wear, because you really don't see their feet. It's a sort of helmet-like structure with a tail that goes out behind.
So they can be quite large, depending on the species. The American horseshoe crab, we've seen some that as wide across as about 35 centimeters or so.
That's over a foot across for us non-metric using Americans.
So they can be pretty big, particularly the larger ones, which tend to almost always to be the females. They can be pretty hefty, particularly when they're full of eggs. Again, we've weighed some that are probably up to 7 or 8 pounds or so. So they're pretty large animals, but totally harmless. If you happen to look at the legs on the underside and they're all wiggling around, they look a little intimidating, but they don't really have any biting force with their claws. It's not like getting, nipped by a true crab. These guys it's more like a baby teething on your finger. It's not something that will hurt in any way. And then the tail, which when people often look at them and say, oh, it must be a stinger like a scorpion, but it's not at all poisonous. It's simply used as a lever to flip themselves right side up if they happen to get overturned.
So here we have this intimidating, spiky, armored spider with a tail that looks like it could poison you, but is totally harmless. These little guys couldn't hurt you if they tried. So even at first glance,
they're weird little dudes. They're cute, weird little dudes.
Beyond the visual, these crabs' weirdness starts with the fact that, technically, pedantically, I've already been lying to you. These creatures, these horseshoe crabs, are not actually even crabs to begin with. But why would I do that? Why would I just go on the internet and tell lies?
So Initially, when horseshoe crabs were found, they were assumed to be aligned with crabs, true crabs. So if you were to go down to the beach and you see like a fiddler crab or like a blue crab swimming, that is what they were thought to be aligned with, basically based on what we call overall shape, or a scientific word for that is morphology. Now, there was some work that was done in 1885 by a gentleman by the last name of Lancaster, who looked at the musculature of scorpions and the musculature of horseshoe crabs, and demonstrated by comparison, looking at what we call homology, or things that are the same, that horseshoe crabs are actually much more closely related to scorpions than they are to true crabs. And so what that means, and that's really been iterated upon for, at this point now, what is almost a century and a half, almost exactly, that horseshoe crabs fall into a larger group of arthropods that we call Chelicerata or chelicerates. These are organisms that have a structure that are called chelicerae. And horseshoe crabs are little pincers that are sort of the first pair of legs that they have. In spiders, they're fangs. In scorpions, they're also little pincers as well. And so we know that horseshoe crabs are not crabs, they are chelicerates. However, because the word and the terminology is so well built into our conversation on these organisms, we haven't really come up with a new term. I quite like the German word for them, which is sword tail. Don't ask me to pronounce it. But I think that's at least a little bit closer to the reality than what we in the English-speaking world use.
If you're curious, which I know I was, that German word is Schwirtschwanze, and is how German refers to the order in which these animals belong. Order, of course, is the taxonomic level more specific than the subphylum of chelicerates Dr. Bicknell was just talking about. It also contains animals like spiders, scorpions, and ticks. In English, the order name is Scyphosura, and bonus word fact, that also means swordtail, deriving from the Greek scyphos, meaning sword, and ura, meaning tail. And honestly, I am kinda here for that. The names of sea scorpion and sea spider were already taken, so why not swordtail? Heute gibt es 4 Arten von Schwirtschwanze, that is to say that
there's 4 species that are alive today that are placed within 3 genera.
The American horseshoe crab, Limulus polyphemus, which ranges from Maine down to the Yucatan Peninsula. There are 3 species in Asia with overlapping ranges. The northernmost species is variously referred to as the tri-spine horseshoe crab, or locally Chinese horseshoe crab or Japanese horseshoe crab. Scientific name is Tachypleus tridentatus. The northern range is the Seto Inland Sea of Japan, and then they range south to Indonesia. That range overlaps with the mangrove horseshoe crab, which is Carcinoscorpius rotundicata, which, as the name suggests, is really very faithful in its habits to mangrove forests and nearshore areas close to mangroves. And Carcinoscorpius ranges from, it's found in Hong Kong and coastal provinces of China, all the way south and then over to India. And then the third species, which is known as the coastal horseshoe crab, scientific name Tachypleus gigas, is largely coincident in its range with the mangrove horseshoe crab, although it doesn't get quite as far north. So there are some places, such as Indonesia, where the 3 species can be found together. Someday I'd like to see that for myself, but those are the only 3 species of horseshoe crabs in Asia. So that plus the American horseshoe crab gives us the 4 that we have today.
Though there are a litany of differences between these species, depending on how finely you focus your microscope, they do happen to share a lot of major traits. First, and probably most noticeable, would be their shell, that horseshoe-shaped helmet from which the animal derives its common name. This helmet is comprised of two parts. The front portion that's actually shaped like a horseshoe is called the prosoma. The abdomen part behind it is called the opisthosoma, and the tail, well, it's not a tail, that would be imprecise, so technically we call it the telson. But for all this anatomical jargon, the helmet is nearly exactly that, armor. Only instead of being made of metal like a human suit, it's made of chitin, the same material nature uses as a building block to make shrimp shells, insect exoskeletons, and even mushroom cell walls. As an extraordinarily strong material, this chitin defends the body underneath it from threats of those that would hunt it, provides resistance to drying out when outside of water, and even offers structural support. This helmet armor is so effective that when right side up, adult horseshoe crabs are nearly impervious to most predation.
That's a really good topic. So when horseshoe crabs get to adulthood, basically nothing eats them. There are some sort of anecdotal records of like loggerhead turtles like having a go at them. Alligators, I think, as well. A colleague of mine from India has seen an alligator try to eat a horseshoe crab. But really, there's a pretty nasty exoskeleton. It's covered in spikes, and honestly, they don't have a lot of like soft stuff inside them. So they don't make for the most enjoyable meal for most things.
While there may not be a lot of it, that soft stuff comprising its body is so unique, alien, and cool that it does fully deserve the highest levels of protection that its spiky chitinous exoskeleton has to offer.
On the underside, the best way to visualize is it's kind of like a spider in terms of the legs, and then the middle segment has a series of flaps, which are called the book gills.
I think also the thing that I find quite exceptional about them is these book gills that within scorpions have been sort of modified into book lungs. That's what they allow. That's how they have oxygen kind of move through the body. But because horseshoe crabs are marine animals that live in the ocean, they need to get oxygen out of the water, and so they have these gill-like structures that are quite exceptional.
These structures are called book gills because the 5 paired appendages and all of the layers within them look like pages of a book. And I know what you might be thinking, like, oh, this makes sense, right? Marine animals have to breathe, and most of them do that with gills. So it goes for fish, sharks, and many in between. That's not that exciting, but y'all, I need you to get excited about book gills because they are one of these ancient creatures' coolest superpowers. You see, like the gills of other marine animals, they do allow the crab to breathe, but they are quite literally built different.
Structurally, they're quite different. I mean, a fish gill requires the buoyancy of water to be functional, and water is taken in through the mouth of the fish, and then the gill opercula divert the water past the gills, and then it goes out the other side. The book gills are structurally reinforced by chitin. There's chitin on the leaflets. Basically, what that means is when you take them out of water, they can still work as long as there's some humidity and some moisture in the sediment. So they can survive out of water for days.
Okay, let's pause and realize just how big of a deal that is. Most gills literally cease functioning as soon as they don't have oxygenated water flowing through them. But this ingenious invention of Mother Nature's creation has let this animal conquer both land and sea, thriving on the very moisture present in the air and soil. Don't have water to breathe? Just find it somewhere else, guys. Plus, these gills are useful for more than just breathing. While these animals are not known for swimming, they sometimes do. It is a behavior that is more common in juveniles. They can flip upside down and flutter the pages of their book gills alongside their spidery legs, using their telson as a rudder, and they put on the most adorable display of swimming that might exist in the oceanic realm. Please check out the video in the show notes and bring a smile to your face.
So they do a terrific job even in environments that are not aquatic. That isn't to say that they can survive indefinitely without water, but certainly they can survive for days as long as the gills are kept on the underside. If they're flipped over, then they'll tend to dry out more quickly, and they're also at risk of getting eaten by seagulls and things like that.
If you do see one that's upside down, please turn it the other way up. Let it scuttle away.
Remember, as intimidating as they look, these creatures can't hurt, sting, or bite you. And that leads into the other part of this underside that is absolutely wild, and that's how these creatures eat.
And the main thing that's strange about them is that the mouth, you know, most animals, you think about it, most animals, the mouth is up in front. But in horseshoe crabs, the mouth is down on the underside of the animal between the leg bases. And they actually chew with the base of their legs. And it's actually quite fun to watch. If you can give them a little shrimp or a piece of clam or something, and you can hold them upside down and give them something to eat, and you can see them grinding it up, and it just goes right down the hatch. And they use their chelicerae and their the little claws that are on the end of their walking legs, and they push the food into their mouth that way.
All right, talk about things I didn't know were on my bucket list until now, but I could die happy if I ever got to hold a horseshoe crab like a little baby and watch it eat by chewing with its legs. But for now, because I won't and don't advocate for stealing a live animal just to feed it, you and I will have to watch the video linked in the show notes. Down the hatch. With legs that can chew and gills that can swim, horseshoe crabs reject all convention, and honestly, I can respect that. Like gazing upon the shining armor of legendary Arthurian knights, watching these animals scuttle about with their chitinous armor is quite a sight to behold. But, speaking of sight, I am forced to wonder, with their soft body tucked underneath such heavy and effective armor, how do these denizens of sea and shore actually see? And, just like with their mouths and gills, horseshoe crabs manage to find a really weird solution here. And it's not slits in their armor to see through like us silly humans in metal, and it's not eyes on stalks that are outside the armor. No, horseshoe crabs solve their vision issues by having 10 eyes located all over their body, armor, telson tail, and underside included. And, of course, that number is kind of dependent on how you define the word eye.
Yeah, so when we think of eyes as humans, what we tend to think of is like the camera lens eye that we have. But in horseshoe crabs and in arthropods in general, when we talk about eyes, we're talking about structures that can sort of perceive light in some kind of way. And so along the telson, as well as in different parts of on the head section, on the prosoma, there are an array of what we consider to be light sensing structures that basically allow them to identify if they're in a space where there's sort of increased exposure, and that allows them to really get an idea of like what is happening around them.
So, let's channel our inner Count from Sesame Street and count along with the weird world of horseshoe crab vision. The first and most obvious pair of eyes is the one you'd look at and immediately think, yup, those are eyes all right.
And then it has two things that look like eyes on the top surface of this helmet, and they are eyes. They're very good eyes.
These first two eyes are what are known as compound eyes, the same type and structure of eye as those of flies and many other insects. And before we move on, note that this is strange in the world of chelicerates. All others in this subphylum, spiders, scorpions, ticks, you name it, none of them have compound eyes. To visualize this, one compound eye is made up of individual rod receptors, called ommatidia, arranged in a sphere such that when all put together, they kind of make the eye look like a disco ball. Each ommatidium creates one simple image. So when the 800 or so that make up a horseshoe crab eye all work in concert, you get 800 plus simple images that all get overlain on top of each other. So really, what the animal sees from these two eyes is a composite mosaic of all 800 plus images. How they avoid ocular migraines is kind of a miracle. Eyes like this have certain advantages.
Like all compound eyes, they're very good at seeing movement, and they do have pattern recognition and so forth in those eyes. So they have very, very good vision.
This type of eye also confers a wider view angle, so it's pretty good at seeing movement happening in a wide swath around it. However, since at the end of the day this is hundreds of images laid on top of each other, the result isn't exactly 4K high resolution as we would define it as humans.
Because ultimately, they don't have a lot of particularly good standard ocular vision. There's a paper that came out in I want to say the 90s that they basically put horseshoe crabs next to mates and then horseshoe crabs next to rocks, and they weren't really good at differentiating between mate and rock based on their compound eye. And so they need sort of other tools to understand what's happening around them.
But lucky for the crab, vision from these two lateral eyes is not the only way these animals can perceive the world. Right behind each compound eye is a more rudimentary one, bringing our total to 4, and towards the front of the shell, right around where you might imagine its forehead to be, it has 3 more eyes, 2 median eyes and 1 endoparietal eye. Not a lot is known about these 5 eyes, other than that they can perceive things like UV light from the sun and, by extension, light reflected by the moon. This means that the animal is really well adapted to perceive and follow the cycles of day and night, as well as cycles of the moon. Being able to perceive lunar cycles is huge for these animals. But you're going to have to listen to episode 2 to figure out why. Moving on to eyes 8 and 9, they have 2 more eyes located on their underside, near the mouth at the base of the legs, which, to be honest, we know nearly nothing about. They might use them when they swim upside down, but other than that, your guess is as good as mine. At this point, we've reached 9 eyes. So what about the 10th? The 10th eye, if you really want to call it that, is actually a full array of light-sensitive receptors located all up and down the telson, that tail-like structure that it uses as a lever and a rudder. That's right, it has literal eyes all up and down its tail, making it so eldritch that even H.P. Lovecraft would probably be a little unnerved. And there's an even crazier aspect here too. These eyes work in concert with the animal's brain to entrain these daily and monthly cycles into its circadian rhythm, which serves as an internal clock. And this clock powers a few things, but most exciting, it underlies the most metal vision fact in perhaps the entire animal kingdom. Every morning, when dawn's breaking light filters down into the shallows and graces the eyes of the American horseshoe crab, they immediately melt a part of their own lateral eyes, reabsorb it, and then frantically spend all day rebuilding that part of the eye because it is what lets the animal see so well in the dark. And this happens every single day. This has been studied in the American horseshoe crab, Limulus polyphemus, an animal that can see absolutely excellently at night. It may not be high resolution, mind you, but they can still see in incredibly dark conditions. This is because they have a structure in the eye that is extraordinarily good at catching photons, a net that catches even the tiniest amounts of light. It's called a rhabdom, and every single one of the 800 plus ommatidium that make up each compound eye has this structure. But in the daytime, having these super light-sensitive nets is like wearing night vision goggles during a sunny day in the snow. There is so much light that you would simply be blinded and overwhelmed. But rather than hide, move, cover, or disable these structures, Limulus goes straight to destruction. Do not pass go, just blow up your own eye. Triggered by the first rays of dawn, a complex molecular reaction acts like a knife, cutting the cords of the net. And then those net fragments, and all of the proteins that built them, will be reabsorbed by the eye and then used to slowly rebuild the rhabdom over the course of the day, because they're going to need it again to see during the next night. I mean, it really makes you appreciate how our human eyes can quickly adapt to changing light conditions without, blowing themselves up every single day. But for the ancient crab that's not a crab, this is what evolution landed on. So they heckin' kept it. If the process of breaking yourself in order to see ain't broke, don't fix it, I guess. If all that wasn't enough, what if I told you that horseshoe crabs, at some point, are likely to have maybe saved your life, or at the very least, improved your health? Yes, you, the listener listening to these words right now. See, if you've ever been vaccinated, had an IV, taken injectable medicine, had any sort of implant, or eaten meat, dairy, or fish, you can likely thank a horseshoe crab for the cleanliness and sterility that hopefully ensured you didn't become horribly sick or infected afterwards. And as hilarious as that would be if it was because a medically trained horseshoe crab was perched on the doctor's shoulder and helped with the process, the truth is honestly just about as strange. The power lies, with absolutely no hyperbole, within the very blood of the animal.
I think the other thing that's probably really unique about them is their blood is blue. So as opposed to what we think of in mammals, where we have red blood, which is iron-rich, horseshoe crabs have a very weird quirk where their blood is copper-rich. And so that makes for what we call blue blood, which has its utility in the medical industry. What I really like about blue blood, sort of functionally, is it works basically like our red and white blood cells in one system.
As a quick refresher, our red blood cells are what's responsible primarily for oxygen transport, while our white blood cells comprise our immune system to fight off threats, generally.
They don't have white blood cells like we do. Basically, their blue blood cells both move through the body in that sort of oxygen transfer system, but also identify any sort of endotoxins or parasites that need to be dealt with at the same time.
Horseshoe crab's immune system is very different from a mammalian immune system. And the way they defend themselves against diseases is based on the property of the blood, which will cause or have a clotting response if the carapace or shell is pierced and they get bacteria inside of them. So we have a completely different way of responding to an infection. But if a horseshoe crab is infected by bacteria, what happens is the blood cells release these chemicals, which are referred to as the lysate. So they release these compounds, and essentially that just walls off the bacteria in a clot, and they get rid of it.
Detect, isolate, destroy.
Now, kind of by serendipity, back in the day, two scientists, Jack Levin and Frederick Bang, working at the Marine Biological Lab in Woods Hole, discovered that if you take the horseshoe crab blood out from the animal and don't expose it to air and don't expose it to bacteria, that blood remains clear. It's kind of a nice sky blue color when it comes out of the animal. But if you introduce even trace amounts of bacteria, the blood will have an almost instantaneous clotting reaction. So what they reasoned is that you could use horseshoe crab blood as a way of assaying for the presence of bacteria in things like food substances or injectable materials and so forth. The idea being if something is free of bacteria, the blood will stay as a liquid, whereas if bacteria are present, it'll clot.
That's just about as close to meeting the definition of a miracle substance as I've ever heard. And as an added bonus, using horseshoe crab blood in this way got rid of some rather archaic and inefficient medical practices from the before times.
Now, back in the day, in the olden times when we did testing for bacterial endotoxins, what they used to do was take a sample of, let's say, a pharmaceutical substance, they injected it into a rabbit, and they waited to see if the rabbit got a fever, which would take a couple days. But that rabbit test wasn't as sensitive as the LAL test. It also was much more expensive and had problems with reproducibility, because even if you use the same genetic strain of rabbits, it wouldn't always, from animal to animal, have the same exact response. So in time, the FDA approved the limulus lysate test as a industry standard for the detection of bacterial contamination. And that's what's still used today.
Save a rabbit, use a crab. Now, that is not to say that using horseshoe crab blood doesn't have an array of concerns, animal welfare being chief among them. They may not be as fluffy as lab rabbits, but in order to get this blue gold, we do have to capture, bleed, and release these animals, somewhere on the order of 1.1 million or so individuals every year on the U.S. East Coast alone. And that is to say nothing of the industry that uses the Asian species. And this practice is profitable. Properly harvested blood can go for around $60,000 US per gallon, and it is extraordinarily effective in keeping us safe, our foods, our vaccines, our medicines. But at the end of the day, we are basically vampires, feeding on the blood of crabs in order to prolong our own lives.
Blah, blah, blah.
Hey there! Sorry to take you away from the action for a minute, but I hope you're enjoying the episode. If you like what you're hearing, and I hope that if you've made it this far into the episode that you do, I'd be honored if you considered subscribing to the Bio-Diversity Patreon. Doing so can give you access to some cool exclusive content, like the Discord community and the Deeper Descent bonus show. And it helps me keep this show free for everyone, just as Poseidon intended. If you, like me, want to know all the cool nitty-gritty details of exactly how horseshoe crabs explode their own eyeballs, or dig deeper into the story of how we're looking to transition away from using their blood in the biomedical field, that's where you're going to find it. You can find links in the show notes, and I hope to see you there. Thank you so much for considering. Back to the show. Look at us. We've already been talking for nearly 45 minutes, and we have almost entirely been focused on what makes the individual animal cool. But the importance of these animals goes far beyond just their shell. They're remarkably important to the environments within which they live. And that story starts with a bang. Kind of literally, as one of the most interesting and well-known behaviors of the animal just so happens to also be incredibly important from an ecological perspective as well. I'm of course referring to the magic of mating. Yes, the proliferation and polyamory of these pragmatic prehistoric pairings is nothing short of a synchronized spectacle, a brimming ballet of briny breeding, an overt Ordovican well, you get the idea.
Yeah. If you haven't seen this, you need to come to the Delaware Bay in the springtime. There are people that can tell you where it is. On the whole, it's an absolute melee of horseshoe crabs. There's just thousands of them.
Every year, one of nature's grandest spectacles graces the shores along which the horseshoe crabs live. Acting with the rhythm of the moon and the very tides she guides, thousands of horseshoe crabs simultaneously rise from the briny depths to mate, lay eggs, and ensure their species carries on for another generation.
It is quite a scene, quite a scene.
This spectacle is so grand that it inspired Sir David Attenborough himself to come and film it, which in turn, serendipitously, inspired Dr. Mark Botton to begin his path.
Exactly. So in the spring of 1977, I was a new graduate student at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and we graduate students had the opportunity to go to the Rutgers Field Station, which is in Delaware Bay in the far south of New Jersey. And I didn't have any preconceived plan about what I was going to do my thesis work on. It was really just, a learning opportunity to understand the ecosystem. And first week I was there, we had a visit from a big film crew led by David Attenborough, Sir David Attenborough, I should say, came over from the UK with a big film crew from the BBC doing the Life on Earth series. And they had come specifically to Delaware Bay to film the mass spawning of horseshoe crabs that occurs each spring along the Delaware Bay beaches. And I'd seen horseshoe crabs as a boy growing up in Brooklyn, New York, but I'd never seen large numbers, just, the occasional one here or there. And it was amazing to see the huge numbers of horseshoe crabs coming ashore to lay their eggs, and the activity of the birds who would converge on the shoreline to feed on the eggs from the crabs. The scene on the beach was Attenborough was walking along the beach holding a lantern looking at the crabs, and of course he was such an enthusiastic speaker and such a phenomenal advocate for nature that it was just like amazing to see this effort to look at these animals that most people didn't seem to care all that much about. So I started, curiosity got the better of me, and I was talking to the man who was the scientific advisor to Attenborough's team, a man named Carl Schuster, who really gave me a crash course in horseshoe crab biology over the next 4 or 5 days. And he pointed out that there really were a lot of basic features of natural history in horseshoe crabs that people hadn't really explored. And since I was there and a firsthand witness to what was going on, he sort of said, let's try to do a little project together to try to quantify the abundance of the crabs, because he was a student back in the 1940s and said he had never seen the abundance as high as it was that spring in 1977. So from that sort of fortuitous meeting with the Attenborough team and with Carl Schuster, that sort of planted the seed that there was some interesting things about these critters that were right there literally at our feet. And I persuaded my thesis advisor to allow me to do some projects with them. And that's kind of how it started.
Honestly, it is more than enough just to watch in awe and be amazed at the flurry that is the spawning behavior of these animals. But, like Dr. Botton, Dr. Brockmann found curiosity alongside that awe, and has focused a lot of her time on unraveling the secrets of this unique behavior. And, thanks to her work, we now know that there is a lot more to it than just a chaotic congregation of carapace that we can see with the naked eye. So we'll be uncovering some of those incredible secrets in episode 2 of this miniseries. Why are these events tied to lunar cycles? How do the adults choose who to mate with and who to spurn among thousands of crabs? How cute exactly is a volcano of baby horseshoe crabs erupting from the sand? Find out when the hit drama Love Lives of Horseshoe Crabs airs in episode 2 of this miniseries, only on Bio-Diversity. For now, though, know that these mating events are really crucial, not only to ensure future populations of horseshoe crabs, but also to the local ecology of the areas where they happen. Us humans are fond of chicken and duck eggs because of the flavor and the nutrients they can give us, and for some ecosystems, the inundation of millions of horseshoe crab eggs serves as a much-needed nutrition boost. Adding to the pre-existing chaos of these spawning events is a cast of shorebirds. Like a grad student to the symposium's buffet, the promise of free food entices a feathered frenzy. And specifically, one bird has garnered a lot of attention due to its near reliance on these events to survive and reproduce.
The Delaware Bay, because it has historically had such a large population of horseshoe crabs, is visited in the springtime, usually starting around May 10th or so, by a group of shorebirds that are highly migratory. And the one that has attracted the most attention is a bird called the red knot, which overwinters in South America and then breeds in the Arctic. And to make that incredible journey, they have certain critical stopover sites, and Delaware Bay is one of those areas. So the birds are flying up from the northern coast of South America and making a nonstop flight from there to Delaware Bay. In usually about 3 weeks' time, more or less, they refuel, they essentially double their weight and fatten up, and that's necessary to rebuild their muscle reserves, their lipid reserves, which they then will need in order to make the next flight, which is from Delaware Bay up to the Arctic breeding areas around Hudson Bay. So you need to have a predictable, rich supply of food in order to complete that journey.
And what's more predictable and rich than millions of nutritious eggs simply buried in the sand like treasure? The red knot itself, this cute, plump-looking shorebird with a robin red belly when wearing its breeding plumage, is classified as near threatened by the IUCN. But an American-specific subspecies, called the rufa, is listed as actually threatened under the United States Endangered Species Act. One principal justification for this listing was loss of critical food supplies, and to them, there's almost nothing as critical as these eggs.
So the importance of the eggs is really for this essential refueling stop during the migration from the South American breeding areas up to the Arctic.
So it goes that impacts to horseshoe crab populations means impacts to egg numbers, which means impacts to birds. Plus, the frenzy of activity and egg nutrients are likely important for other parts of the shoreline ecosystem as well, such as how the intricate web of ecology is woven. It really makes one think about the compounding effects of one's choices. Now, much of what we know about the behavior of these animals is from these breeding events. That's usually when it is easiest to see and observe them. But that leaves a bit of a juicy mystery. What are these animals doing when not performing their copious copulation? Where do they come from? Where do they go? What are they eating, Cotton Eye Joe?
Yeah, they are feeding in somewhat deeper water on the continental shelf. They don't go really deep. They don't go into trenches or anything like that. They're probably 30, 40, 50 feet, something like that.
But even though they don't necessarily go too far down, there's some intriguing evidence that says that they can sometimes go far.
And how far do they go? The tagging studies are kind of amazing. Some animals don't go very far at all. And in some populations, they don't go very far. But others, there are animals that are tagged in Long Island Sound, back in Connecticut, that go all the way up to Narragansett Bay. There are horseshoe crabs along the west coast of Florida that go from maybe Tampa area all the way up, or a little north of Tampa, all the way up to the Tallahassee, or to the St. Mark's Refuge, south of Tallahassee area, up through that Big Bend area of Florida. So they go quite a ways under some circumstances. I think males more than females, but I think some individuals are moving quite a long ways.
What are they traveling such long distances for? Why do some travel and others remain loyal to local habitats? Is there a deeper reason behind it? Or is it really as simple as traveling for the sake of better food and better habitat? As you know, in the wild, there aren't zookeepers or overly enthusiastic podcast hosts out there to hand feed them, so they must hunt and scavenge their way to a full belly.
So they feed along in shallow areas and along the continental shelf. They feed on clams and worms and so forth. And they kind of burrow into the mud a little bit, or into the sand. And they're able to eat clams. They can get into a clam. They have a little claw that is able to pry open a clam. And they're able to get in there and eat mussels. Yeah, and surf clams.
While clams, and bivalves in general, do seem to be a favorite of these animals, one thing I really think deserves way more consideration is just how much of a vacuum cleaner these animals really are. That is to say, depending on the situation, these animals will chew nearly anything they can get their legs on.
Yeah, pretty much. They're what we call detrital feeders. They just eat whatever they can. There are records of them eating shells. There are records of them like shelly things like gastropods, bivalves, mussels. But for the most part, they pretty much just shovel whatever they can into their mouths. And so if you pick up a horseshoe crab and you dissect its guts, it's mostly sediment. They really just kind of process whatever they can, and it makes them, pretty bottom of the barrel in terms of in the food chain, but also nothing much eats them. So, swings and roundabouts.
This is actually pretty important to the marine environments in which they live. Like a vulture cleaning carrion, there's a lot of virtue to these animals acting like a cleanup crew. And if you ask me, there is another lesson to be learned from these janitor crabs.
I think when they find a patch of something good to eat, they'll work that over. So if they happen to find a mussel bed with small mussels, they could eat hundreds of them in a day. On the other hand, they can also feed on worms and small crustaceans and all sorts of other things. So they're not really predators that are specialized for one particular food, but they take advantage of what's locally available.
Us humans could probably learn a few lessons in food system sustainability from that, but that's another podcast for another day.
They're just weird, right? They're weird little dudes. They're cute, weird little dudes. And if that doesn't get you excited, then, I don't know what to say. Because, cute, weird little things are as exciting as the big fluffy things, in my view. And they're animals that have, that long predate us, long predate almost every real major group of organisms.
Just because something is weird doesn't mean that it's wrong or unsuccessful. So, after today's episode, if there's one thing I'd like you to ponder, it's what can we learn from those that are different? These cute, weird little dudes have been around for so long, but in many ways, it feels like we're just now really starting to get to know them.
I think, though, that there's been a real pulse in studies of horseshoe crabs in the last, say, 10 or 15 years. I think the ecology of the juveniles is still largely unknown. I mean, even in basic things like where they are, what's the survival rate from one stage to another, the basic ecological questions. We don't have a lot of knowledge on that. So I think particularly in Asia, a lot of work is now being done to fill in some of the natural history gaps, the distribution, the genetics. I think the challenge is turning this into a conservation strategy. So now that we know what we know, what are we going to do about it?
That's all for today's episode of Biodiversity. This episode, which already ran over an hour, looked pretty exclusively at the biology and ecology of these animals, and I sincerely hope that it got you hyped. But guys, there is so much more to talk about when it comes to these charismatic chelicerates. So I hope you tune in for the next episode for a look backwards, as Dr. Bicknell takes us through the fossil histories of these ancient animals, as well as a look forward, as Dr. Brockmann guides our delve into the amazing life history strategies that will hopefully ensure these animals' existence long into the future. And after that, in the third and final episode of this mini-series, we'll turn our thankfully non-exploding eyes towards the human dimensions of these animals. Led by Dr. Botton, we'll examine their relationship to us, the threats that these animals face, and look at the present question: what exactly are we going to do about it?
We know, okay, so we say, okay, we're losing good habitat, but what are you going to do in, what are the ways in which habitat can be preserved, if not restored?
And I think, if that isn't exciting, then there's probably nothing I can say that would convince you otherwise. So yeah, just look after the little spiky dudes, look after the animals that don't look particularly charismatic, because those are the organisms that have been around for much, much longer than we can really conceptualize, and they're really important.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Biodiversity. Big thank yous to Dr. Jane Brockmann, Dr. Mark Botton, and Dr. Russell Bicknell for their expertise and providing their voices to the show. Another big shout out to my biggest patrons, Vorpal Gnome and Laughsalotl. Your support means the world. You can become a patron too at the link in the show notes. Remember, much like the horseshoe crab, what makes you weird and different might also make you incredibly strong. I, for one, take immense comfort in the fact that I, like them, am too weird to fail. I'll see you next time.